Hello. In this particular little exercise here, we are going to talk about OSHA. And I've been in the workforce before OSHA even existed. And so got out of the Air Force in 1968, started working then. So I'm pretty familiar with it and lived with it almost my entire life. And I'm going to guess that most of you haven't been around this long. So we're going to get started on OSHA and kind of give you some information about the creature we're dealing with here. Now, the one thing you might want to think of is OSHA good or bad? Well, it's good. Saved a lot of lives, I'm sure. I'm sure it has. So the acronym OSHA applies to both two things. Occupational Safety Health Act of 1970, which established the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. This is something the government likes to do, like NASA, same way. National Aeronautics and Space Administration, but it was founded by the National Aeronautics and Space Act. So that's just what government does sometimes. Anyhow, so somebody asks you, well, OSHA is actually two things, and they're kind of interchangeable, but that's what it really is, two different things. The regulations that cover general industry are in 29 CFR 1910. Construction is 29 CFR 1926. This means Title 29, Code of Federal Regulations, CFR, Part 1910, which is then divided into 20 subparts, A, B, C, etc. But usually the subparts aren't used in citing a regulation. It's usually just 29 CFR 1910.147, the control of hazardous energy lockout tagout, for example, or just 1910.147. Anytime subpart, like subpart S is electrical. So somebody might say, oh yeah, subpart S, that's, and it's electrical. But generally speaking, the subparts aren't that used that often. Most of the times, the safety professionals will deal with OSHA in two ways. OSHA regulations, of course, many of which we'll cover in detail in this course, and OSHA inspections. So OSHA inspections are things that we just have to put up with. Again, they're not good or bad. They're just there and there for a reason. So if you have an OSHA inspection, you just have to deal with it. Now, if you put a hard hat up to your ear, you can hear the OSHA. Maybe not. So this is the 29 CFR 1910 table of contents. This is the part numbers 1910. The part number title, Occupational Safety and Health Standards, is standard number 1910. And this is some kind of GP, other gobbledygook down here, table of contents in ECFR. So part 1910, subpart A is general. And I'm not going to read all of this stuff, but there's this compliance duties owed to each employee. I thought that was interesting in here. And this is what there are. 1910, this is the whole 1910.9. A, personal protective equipment. Standards in this part requiring the employer to provide personal protective equipment, including respirators and other types of PPE, because of hazards to employees, impose a separate compliance duty with respect to each employee covered by the requirement. The employer must provide PPE to each employee required to use the PPE, and each failure to provide PPE to an employee may be considered a separate violation. Now, training. This is still 1910.9. This is paragraph B. There's only two paragraphs in it. Standards in this part requiring training on hazards and related matters, such as standards requiring that employees receive training or that the employer train employees, provide training to employees, or institute or implement a training program, impose a separate compliance duty with respect to each employee covered by the requirement. The employer must train each affected employee in the manner required by the standard, and each failure to train an employee may be considered a separate violation. They see where they're going on this. They're saying that each deficiency or failure to provide PPE or train may be considered a separate violation. That's the whole gist of these two things here. And this training is required. It's required in a heck of a lot of OSHA standards, and if it's not, it's implied. If you don't train people, how do you expect them to be safe? Subpart B is adoption and extension of established federal standards. And I'm not going to get into much detail, but Part C is a good one. I don't know why they do this. There is a Part C. There it is, reserved. Part D, walking working surfaces. Now we're going to talk about some of these like ladders, fall protection, that type of thing. There you are, training requirements. So we're going to talk about that later, but that's subpart D. Subpart E, exit routes and emergency planning. We'll touch on emergency action plans, I think, but these are covered more in the fire science course. Subpart F, power platforms, man lifts, and vehicle mounted platforms. And man lifts are kind of obsolete. You only have one now if it's grandfathered in. Man lift is one of those things that you stand on. It's a belt that goes from the ceiling to the basement, and you stand it on. It's like 1 foot by 2 foot piece, and hanging onto it. And they have one at the Fort Smith feed mill, and it's the people that work there all the time there, they love it. But I've ridden it a couple times, and it's not my favorite thing to do. G, occupational health and environmental control. So we're going to look at occupational noise exposure in that one later on. Hazardous materials, H. And there's a lot of hazardous materials. Oxygen, how about that? Oxygen is a hazardous material. Without it, we die, but we need it, but it still could be a hazardous material. And part of this thing is 1910.119, process safety management of highly hazardous chemicals, and 19.120, hazardous waste operations and emergency response. These are two very, very medium powerful standards. And the process safety management standard, I like it. I like the way it's written. It's really succinct. It gets to the point. But the hazardous waste operations, oh my God, that's all over the place. So there's a lot of stuff in that one. And there's some dipping and coating operations are covered. Now, subpart I is PPE, general requirements, eye and face protection, respiratory protection, head protection, foot protection, electrical protective equipment, hand protection. So there's a lot of stuff they taught me. Each of these are pretty short. And then there's more for fall rest systems. J, general environmental controls, permit required confined spaces, very important standard. Their control of hazardous energy lockout tagout. To me, that is probably the best OSHA standard they've ever come up with. The theory is impeccable on it, and if it's put into place, it's almost, you never know, there's things that go wrong still, but you can almost guarantee that nobody's going to get hurt because somebody went and started up a machine that somebody was working on. Medical services and first aid, and we might hit that, I'm not sure, but that's just a little bit about what you should have in your first aid kit. Everybody usually people want to know that. Fire protection, we cover that more in fire science too. Fire suppression equipment, fixed fire suppression equipment, automatic sprinkler systems, etc. And that's automatic sprinkler systems that are required by an OSHA standard. So you have NFPA for the main, your big ones that are going to cover your building. That's going to be covered under NFPA. And there's other and fire protection systems. Compressed gas and compressed air. Materials handling and storage, powered industrial trucks. We all know those as forklifts, and we will touch on that. It's an important standard. That's a good standard too. General requirements for all machines under machine guarding. We'll hit that. That's not very big. Subpart P, hand and portable powered tools, another hazardous equipment. In general, guarding of portable powered tool. We'll touch on those. Welding, cutting, and brazing, 252. General requirements on that. That's important as well. There's some stuff for special industries. R, and there's S. S is all electrical. And yeah, we'll touch on that too. Commercial diving operations, that's too specialized. I'm not going to worry about that. And U and what to Y are reserved. And what about Z? Oh, there it is. Toxic and hazardous substances. Okay. 1910.1000, air contaminants, asbestos, bunch of stuff there. All kind of, well, they're hard to pronounce, and they're probably pretty hazardous. So a lot of stuff in there. Chromium VI, that's hexavalent chromium, VI being 6 hexavalent. That's given off when you're welding stainless steel, among other things. That could be bad. Bloodborne pathogens is a standard that's good to know about. That's an important standard too, especially if you're in medical industry or you're dealing with anybody that might be injured. And then 1910.1200, hazard communication. Now, hazard communication is covered in a couple other places in these courses, that certain different classes that I teach, and that's good because it's a very misunderstood standard. So it's good. It's really an important one too. And there's so much authority gobbledygook on that. And then there's some definitions they put in here. Incorporated by reference. 1926. This is actually so 26 part of obviously construction, but they're gonna they're gonna say that any other standards of agencies or organizations which are not agencies of the U.S. government, such as NFPA or ASTM, have the same force and effect as other standards in this part. So only the mandatory provisions which use contain the word shall or other mandatory language of standards incorporated by reference are adopted as standards under the Occupational Safety and Health Act. The location where the standards may be examined are as follows. So there you go. If you're worried about that, you can go to Washington, D.C., or the regional field office of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Well, they're listed in the U.S. government manual. I bet if you go there, they won't know what you're talking about. And these are some of them. ASME. A lot of the, there's a ton of them in here. So that's just to kind of give you an I'm go through all of them. Point is, if an OSHA employee claims something is incorporated by reference, look it up. It may not be. They may be wrong. But an OSHA employee tells you something, look it up anyhow. Okay, general duty clause. You're going to hear this a lot. 5A1 or general duty clause. Section 5 duties. Each employer shall furnish to each of his employees employment and a place of employment which are free from recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious physical harm to his employees. And then each employer shall comply with occupational safety and health standards promulgated in its act. Now, where they'll use this one most of the time is if they find something in your facility that they don't like, and it's not in that 2-inch thick book of OSHA regulations, and they'll use the general duty clause. And that kind of rankles me a little bit. If it was that important, you're going to write me up for it. Why don't you put it in the book? And also, if I comply with all these regulations in this 2-inch thick book, and they're all okay, and you're going to get me on something like this. I don't like that. I think if it's important, you should put it in the book, but that's the way it is. And I get where they have to have a catch-all because you can't cover everything too. So the general duty clause or 5A1 will be used by OSHA to issue a citation for something that isn't covered in all their regulations. So just because you can't find a specific regulation that covers something unsafe doesn't mean you won't be cited. If it's unsafe regulation or no. So you should still deal with it. So there's a 5B that nobody ever talks about. Section 5 duties, and 5B says each employee shall comply with occupational safety and health standards and all rules, regulations, and orders pursuant to this act, which are applicable to his own actions and conduct. I have never heard of anybody ever being cited under this. So not only each employer must do it, each employee do it. You might want to have that in your back pocket just in case you need it someday. Definitions, letters of interpretation. OSHA receives thousands of requests each year requesting clarification on standards and how they may apply to unique situations. OSHA will respond to these questions through letters of interpretation. Here's the problem with letters of interpretation. They almost always start off with, oh, sorry it took so long to get back to you, because it's like 6 months or years sometimes later that they're going to get around to answering it. So here you are, you have a question about a standard. OSHA just takes its good old time getting back to you. You'd think somebody was interested enough to ask a question on clarification of a standard, OSHA would jump up and say, hey, look, let's take care of this right now. But they don't, but they're important. And then shall, it's mandatory, should is recommended. An authorized person is a person approved or assigned by the employer to perform a specific type of duty or duties, or to be at a specific location or locations or at the job site. Now, many OSHA standards will use the term authorized person in a context specific to that standard. So you have to be careful when you use the authorized person. You have to be, if it's specific to, for instance, lockout, an authorized person is a person that has the key and can lock it out and work on the equipment. But that's not what they're talking about in this definition. So you just have to know what you're talking about. Competent person, one who is capable of identifying existing and predictable hazards in the surroundings or working conditions which are unsanitary, hazardous, or dangerous to employees, and who has authorization to take prompt corrective measures to eliminate them. They have to have the authorization to take prompt correct measures to eliminate these hazards they find. Hazardous substance is a substance which, by reason of being explosive, flammable, poisonous, corrosive, oxidizing, irritating, or otherwise harmful is likely to cause death or injury. I think we agree with that. Qualified is one who, by possession of a recognized degree, certificate, or professional standing, or who by extensive knowledge, training, or experience has successfully demonstrated his ability to solve or resolve problems relating to the subject matter of the work or the project. So some places in OSHA, they say a qualified person. Usually a qualified person is one who the company claims is, or says is qualified. And that's not, I don't know how else you could do it, to be honest with you. Okay, ANSI, American National Standards Institute, founded in 1918. That's a private nonprofit organization. Administrator and coordinator of the U.S. private sector voluntary standardization system. ASME, American Society of Mechanical Engineers, founded in 1880. That's a private not-for-profit membership organization. Promotes the art, science, and practice of multidisciplinary engineering and allied sciences around the globe. ASTM, American Society for Testing Materials, ASTM International, founded in 1898, private non-for-profit membership organization. When I was in California in charge of the geotextile programs, we had ASTM standards, and I was a member of the ASTM for a while. I remember D4632 was the tensile strengthening one, and that's the one I had that practically memorized. It's a membership organization, develops a wide variety of standards. I was a member that was in charge of Geotextilia and used their test methods. BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, part of the United States government, Department of Labor, creates a wide variety of statistics, including accident statistics useful to safety professionals. We'll get into more details in BLS when we talk about OSHA recordables, that type of thing. CIEH is a certified industrial hygienist, certified by the American Board of Industrial Hygiene, demonstrated knowledge and all kind of stuff. So it's one of those certifications by a private organization. Certified safety professionals, kind of the same thing, certified by the Board of Certified Safety Professionals, must pass a series of tests. All right, I'll turn it off. I was never big on the one that people, you see these people have all these letters after the name. I think, they spend more time doing that than doing their job. I was too busy at work to be doing this type of thing, to be honest with you. CTD, cumulative trauma disorder, also known as repetitive stress disorder, repetitive motion injury, and there's other names to it. Caused by repeated use, cumulative, that means traumas that build up over time. dB is a decibel. It's a logarithmic unit of measurement of noise. Logarithmic means if you go from a number up to the next number, it's times 10. DOT, Department of Transportation, it's a federal government body. If you just say DOT, that's a little confusing because every state has a DOT also. And I don't know what they call them here. They're usually referred to by the acronyms as OKDOT. California brings different calls. Their Caltrans, California Department of Transportation. So it's called Caltrans. And that's a pretty good way to do it, I think. EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, federal government institution, of course. Now, there's one thing that EPA and OSHA agree on, and that is the 1910.119 process safety information. That standard is unique in that it's almost identical in both organizations, except all of OSHA's, every standard, part of the standard in OSHA says the employer shall, and in EPA it says the owner or operator shall, and then it's identical. And you can be inspected if you're under it by either one, if you're under process safety management. We were inspected at OK Foods at each facility by EPA, never by OSHA though, for that. GFCI, ground fault circuit interrupter, one of the best creations ever made, I think. Safety device that shuts off the flow of electricity before it can harm a person. HEPA, HEPA or HEPA, high efficiency particulate arrestants. It's a filter that at least 99.3 efficient on particles of 0.3 microns. That's pretty small in size. IDLH, immediately dangerous to life or health. The hazard poses an immediate threat to health or life, would cause irreversible health effects, or would interfere with your ability to escape a confined space unaided. That's interesting how they phrase that. And mnemonic is what it has to do with memory. So the mnemonic is something you use to help you remember something, like Roy G. Biv. What's that for? Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, the colors of the rainbow. You know Roy G. Biv, you know the colors of the rainbow. That's a mnemonic. And my mnemonic is IDLH is I don't live here. And that's just the thing that's there's some hazards. You can look at this here and you can see some hazards here. There's a, over here, there's a saw without guarded and a cord on the floor and looks like oil on the floor, hard hat area, the guy's hard hat in his hands, fire exit being blocked, no smoking, and the guy smoking with gas cans a little bit, and then poster covered up and safety glass over top of the head there, hearing protection here. So you can see a lot of different things in there. That's hazards. You know, they're all hazards. And you see nobody's hurt in this video, so there's not been an accident yet. But that'll fall on somebody, or this guy will hurt his back or something. But you can rest assured that if that keeps up, there will be accidents. JHA or JSA, job hazard analysis, job safety analysis, breaks a job into the smallest task and addresses the safety aspects of each task. LOTO, lockout tagout, program required by 29 CFR 1910.147, the control of hazardous energy. I don't like the term lockout tagout because tagout is rarely used and really should be used, because if according to the standard, it can be locked out, it must be locked out. So tagout's only something you're going to use because I think when OSHA first came out, there weren't as many places to lock out initially as there are now. And now they have to be built into things. So tagout is just a warning device. It's not as nearly effective as lockout. MSD, musculoskeletal disorder, injuries and disorders that affect the body's movement or musculoskeletal system. Examples: carpal tunnel syndrome, tendonitis, muscle strains. MSDS, material safety data sheet. That's the old term for SDS, safety data sheet. So the old codgers like me will still forget, call it MSDS sometimes. It's the same thing as the SDS. So don't let me confuse you. MSHA is the Mine Safety and Health Administration. It's the federal government body that concerns mine safety. So it's the OSHA for miners. NB is the National Board of Boiler and Pressure Vessel Inspectors. Each pressure vessel is assigned an NB number, shows on most certifications. And sometimes it doesn't, but it's stamped on there somewhere. We had a vessel in one of the inspections by the boiler inspector at OK Foods that didn't have a nameplate on it. And I don't know how that happened or how long it was without one. So we had to go to the NB and get one. And this was a pretty polite, pretty detailed thing you had to do. You had to go and take use a pencil and a paper and take a shadow of it and what do you want to call it, an outline of whatever it said on the vessel. And then you had to send them to the national board. The national board would find that where that vessel came from all this information you gave them there. They would make another nameplate. They wouldn't send it to you. They'd send it to a third party, and a third party would come and oversee it being installed, which is a pretty good idea. This way you just can't fake it and get a new nameplate for yours. And it should be a big deal, because if one of these is missing, that's serious. That nameplate tells you the MAWP, the maximal allowable working pressure. And if you don't know that on any pressure vessel, then you're an idiot. That's pure and simple. Why would you use a pressure vessel if you didn't know what the maximum allowable working pressure on that vessel was? You're an idiot. What happens when a pressure vessel missing a nameplate? Well, I just told you. NFPA, National Fire Protection Association, the leading information and knowledge resource on fire, electrical, and related hazard. And it's a big organization. It does a lot of great stuff. Develops codes such as the NAC and sells them. NIOSH, National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, established by the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970, which is OSHA. Part of the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. NIOSH mission to develop new knowledge in the field of occupational safety and health and to transfer that knowledge into practice. NIOSH generally writes the regulations that OSHA enforces. NRR is a noise reduction rating, the amount of noise reduction provided by hearing protection. We'll talk more about that later. Should be indicated on the product or packaging. There you go. OSHA is the National Health and Safe Act of 1970, or the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. It's the federal government agency, but states can have an agency also. There's 26 states that have their own OSHA's mission. With these two To assure safe and healthful working conditions for working men and women by setting and enforcing standards and by providing training, outreach, education, and assistance. And this is interesting. I kind of I got this from an ad for these safety glasses. Safety first, it says, be a sport and invest in a pair of functional shatterproof goggles. This ANSI-compliant and OSHA-approved eyewear will keep your eyes injury-free and yada, 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 yada. See that? OSHA-approved? These people are full of crap. They don't know what they're talking about. Don't buy anything from them. ANSI-compliant may be true. OSHA-approved is a lie. OSHA does not approve any product, okay? If a salesman tells you this is OSHA approved, they're lying. Kick them out. I would never buy from whoever this is, safetygearpro.com, whoever that is. OSHA approved is a lie. And if their product isn't good enough, they can't sell to you without lying about it. There's a problem there. So OSHA approved is not factual. OSHA doesn't approve anything. They write and enforce safety standards. The statement means they think you are too dumb to know this. They're lying, or they don't know what they're talking about. PIT, powered industrial trucks, forklifts, powered pallet jacks. Everybody else calls them forklifts, but OSHA calls them powered industrial trucks, powered industrial equipment. And there's a good picture of something you don't see very often. There's a ladder. It's kind of like and they're strapping on a propane tank to it. Why, I don't know. It's not the right way to carry a propane tank, I'll tell you that. And it looks like propane. PPE, we all know what that is, personal protective equipment, last line of defense in the hierarchy of controls. And you're going to hear hierarchy of controls from me a lot. Doesn't remove or abate the hazard, but properly used protects employees from the hazard. SCBA, self-contained breathing apparatus. SCUBA is self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. So scuba gear, so it's for underwater, but SCBA is for mostly firefighters use them or emergency responders. SDS safety data sheet, document used by manufacturers of chemicals to communicate the safety, handling, storage, etc. such chemicals. Used to be called MSDS. STS, standard threshold shift. The OSHA noise standard defines an STS as an average 10 decibels or more loss in one or both ears relative to the most current baseline audiogram, averaged at 2,000, 3,000, and 4,000 hertz. You don't need to know all that stuff. If you're having hearing protection, you're probably having somebody done for you and they'll know what this is, but you need to know what it is. That's what a standard threshold is, but you don't need to define it. TWA, that's an old airline out of business, transport airlines. Oh, no, wait a minute. It's time-weighted average, excuse me. Exposure usually to a hazardous chemical noise averaged over 8 hours. WMSD, work-related musculoskeletal disorder. MSDs are injuries and disorders that affect the body's movement or musculoskeletal system. Example, carpal tunnel syndrome, tendonitis, muscle strain. WMSD is a work-related musculoskeletal disorder. So in other words, happen at work. Now here's a couple of words you may or may not know. Proactive. Proactive means acting in anticipation of future problems, needs, or changes. Reactive is occurring as a result of stress or emotional upset or after the fact. They say most OSHA regulations were written in blood, which means somebody got hurt, and that's why they wrote a regulation about it. And then there's a lot of truth in that. So of these two things, which is best regarding safety? Well, obviously, we try to be proactive. How do we be proactive? We try to make sure people are trained. We look for hazards and try to get them taken care of, and in anticipation so nobody gets hurt. It's always better to have people not get hurt than have to clean up after that. So that's all, folks. One more question. The one I love to ask when I'm asked if there are any questions, which I'm not going to ask here, obviously, because this is online. When somebody says, hey, any questions? I say, yeah. What's the capital of South Dakota? And they never know. And you know what? You probably don't know either. And I'm not going to tell you. So, but if you better know it, if you expect me, because I might ask it of you, you never know. So anyhow, that's it for now. Be safe.